Today on The State of Us, to heal our nation, we can use great books and improve our schools. Andrew DeBlanco is the author of College, What It Was, Is, and Should Be. He is Alexander Hamilton Professor of American Studies at Columbia University and president of the Teagle Foundation. And he is the author of the review piece in the Wall Street Journal that we're taking a look at today. And it contended the following: great books can heal our divided campuses. Colleges need more programs where students of different backgrounds can wrestle with the big questions posed by the humanities. Today, we're going to look even broader than that because I think a lot of these themes speak to education and the fundamentals of our nation itself. And so that's what we're going to look at. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior focused resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson.
What's a focused historian? No, you might say, oh, college, I don't, this doesn't matter. But to me, this show today is everything in there. There's a lot of concern and angst among the general population with educating young people today, and rightfully so. And you've heard vouchers thrown around in private schools and charter schools, public schools. Maybe the answer isn't a different type of school, but we need to approach what we're going to do in those schools, the way we teach and what we teach. So it doesn't matter whether it's public, private, charter, vouchers, none of that matters. We're going to take a look at today, I think, what the author says and what we believe would be a better way to educate the masses.
So you can send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, or you can mail us a clipping. You can send it to 40 Monument Square, Suite 215, Urbana, Ohio 43078.
We like to hear from you.
That's right.
It's why you are the reason we do the show.
The author here explains in the article that diversity means the most in a classroom environment where students from different backgrounds and with different experiences come together to think about moral and historical questions. Such questions include how rights, goods, and privileges have been distributed in the past and how they should be distributed in the future. Who draws the line between norms and taboos? What is justice or merit? How has race been used to sort human beings into favored and disfavored groups? These kinds of questions belong to the humanities, history, literature, philosophy, the arts, and to what are sometimes called the soft social sciences, political science, and sociology. No reasonable person would dispute that responses will differ according to who is in the room, and that race is an important differentiator, though certainly not the only one in those discussions. This article was released kind of in the wake of the affirmative action decision, and it sort of talks about it that way, but it's bringing to light a larger point that we're missing the boat in higher education, and I think even larger than that, education generally speaking, of what we're prioritizing and when, and how that changes, what's going on. Diversity matters in science, technology, engineering, and math too, because our society needs diverse leadership in the professions to which they lead. It's a stretch, however, to say that diversity matters for students sitting in silent rows at a lecture on finance or computer science. As for the humanities, much of the intellectual energy has moved, and here's the key, has moved to identity-based fields, focusing on gender, sexuality, race, and ethnicity. These disciplines pay overdue attention to dimensions of human experience that were once marginalized in academic life, but they also tend to bring students into affinity groups that insulate them from other students.
I am a longtime teacher of the humanities, and I have set up curricula and started classes at my school. I was given the opportunity to do that, to where we took on some of these questions. And it was amazing, even in what you would call a small rural community, the different opinions you would get. I mean, the student body, less than 20% would be classified as minorities, but the socioeconomic diversity within my classroom would bring a wide variety of answers. The key when you do this is you have to create, the term today would be a safe space where everybody knows that they can voice their opinions and ask their questions without anybody being judgmental, which to me is the key component when you talk about how to get through this great divide that we have right now in our country. Because so many times, and there was a paper I was looking at this morning, it showed one young man with a megaphone screaming at another young lady with a megaphone in front of the Supreme Court building. And they were screaming back and forth at each other through megaphones. And it's like, what's going to get solved there, right? But you set them down in a room and you let them both talk and express their opinions in a place where nobody's going to judge them or their opinion as right or wrong, but listen to what they're saying and understand why they're saying what they're saying. Why do you feel this way? Well, why do you feel this way? Well, this has been my experience in life. This is what happened to my grandma and grandpa, my grandma and great grandma, or this is what happened to my aunt and my aunts and my cousins. And all of a sudden then we realize, oh, well, you have these opinions because of your experiences and you want to protect the people that you love. Hey, we have that in common.
The author contends that what's needed now is a fresh commitment to general education that assigns or attracts students to classes explicitly focused on broad human themes with common reading lists and with peers whose origins, interests, and ambitions differ from their own.
But you can't test that. So what are you going to do on your standardized test? How are you going to know which school is the best? Because you can't test that. You can't give a grade to that. So how do you know?
You can give a grade to it.
No, you can't. But that's another.
You can't give a standardized grade to it.
Exactly.
Well, I'm just saying you can grade it, but that degree of grading is going to involve some level of subjectivity by a teacher.
So then we can't determine which are the best schools and where do I want to send my children, because
I don't know that that's
I want
what
my
school's
children
about, but
it's not.
Well, I think that it is right now.
I mean, you're not a parent yet of anybody who's of school age, so you don't know that is a factor, right? Because I'm out there looking on new houses, and guess what? The number 2 thing is on the housing listing. This is the local school, and this is how they performed on state testing.
I'm not disputing at all that it's a factor in people's decision. I'm disputing that should be our motivation for why we create standardized testing. We've accidentally created a system, and we talked about this on a show not long ago, that by standardizing everything, we have diluted the value of all of our education.
So you're saying what we've done to try to raise the level of education in American classrooms has actually caused there to be less education?
Yes.
In American classrooms?
Yes. By trying to systemize education, which in theory sounds very good. If you want to educate the populace and we want people to have equal opportunity, then the only way to do that is to create a level playing field where we ensure that everybody's going to learn the same thing. And the only way that we can really do that, or the way that we thought that we had to in order to accomplish it, was to create a common curriculum that prioritized in our minds the things that were most important to society today, which are a lot of those STEM-based fields. So what gets put that assigns or attracts students to classes explicitly focused on broad human themes with common reading lists and with peers whose origins, interests, and ambitions differ from their own.
But you can't test that. So what are you going to do on your standardized test? How are you going to know which school is the best? Because you can't test that. You can't give a grade to that. So how do you know?
You can give a grade to it.
No, you can't. But that's another.
You can't give a standardized grade to it.
Exactly.
Well, I'm just saying you can grade it, but that degree of grading is going to involve some level of subjectivity by a teacher.
So then we can't determine which are the best schools and where do I want to send my children because
I don't know that that's
want
what
my
school's
children
about, but
it's not.
Well, I think that it is right now.
I mean, you're not a parent yet of anybody who's of school age, so you don't know that is a factor, right? Because I'm out there looking on new houses, and guess what? The number 2 thing is on the housing listing. This is the local school, and this is how they performed on state testing.
I'm not disputing at all that it's a factor in people's decision. I'm disputing that should be our motivation for why we create standardized testing. We've accidentally created a system, and we talked about this on a show not long ago, that by standardizing everything, we have diluted the value of all of our education.
So you're saying what we've done to try to raise the level of education in American classrooms has actually caused there to be less education?
Yes.
In American classrooms?
Yes. By trying to systemize education, which in theory sounds very good. If you want to educate the populace and we want people to have equal opportunity, then the only way to do that is to create a level playing field where we ensure that everybody's going to learn the same thing. And the only way that we can really do that, or the way that we thought that we had to in order to accomplish it, was to create a common curriculum that prioritized in our minds the things that were most important to society today, which are a lot of those STEM-based fields. So what gets put on the back burner? Well, things like history, right? The humanities. We're still going to teach, things like English, but we maybe aren't going to focus as much on broad philosophical literature as we might focus on, writers with practical life experience. Are there lots of great teachers out there? Yes. Are there lots of sucky teachers out there? Yes. Why might there be more sucky teachers today than there used to be? You've lowered the bar and you've taken away flexibility and creativity. So the people that you're attracting to a field are going to be different. Should we be surprised that we have people who are teachers so that they can be coaches? I mean, should we be surprised by that, who don't love teaching?
And how are they being trained?
Say, read this section of the book, and there will be a test that I printed from the book, and then I will grade it based on the rubric from the book, because I don't love this. And also I was told that this is how it's supposed to be done. So that's how I'm doing it, and all of my students are getting
says follow the book,
because that's how you're going to be evaluated. Right. We've tied all of it together.
So even if you are creative, and even if you are, and I have to step in here because I've got a couple witnesses in here that think I was a pretty good teacher and I was a coach as well. So
yes.
Don't,
that's what I'm saying. There's plenty of great teachers who love being teachers and love being a coach.
Right.
But one of those, I think, examples is, people get frustrated because it's like, well, this person is clearly, what they care about is being a coach and they don't give a damn about being a teacher.
That's a stereotype.
And that's a stereotype. But they're definitely, I had
some
people who
exist
that way.
Yes.
And I guess what I'm contending is I think sometimes, and there's plenty of teachers who are bad, right, who aren't coaches, who are just, I'm going to get here at the time that I'm paid to start, and I'm going to leave at the time I'm paid to end, because that's the expectation of the job, and I'm going to use the prepared material because the school spent good money on this, and that way I don't have to stay longer.
And this is what the experts say I'm supposed to do.
And that's what they say works. So like what,
who am I to
I'm
question?
I'm not getting on them, but I'm saying we have built a system that is encouraging mediocrity in students. Why would we be surprised that we're also encouraging mediocrity in teachers and having a hard time getting people to want to be teachers? It goes back to that fundamental education question of, are we doing education holistically, not just in higher education, but in K through 12 education correctly? Or not correctly, because that contends that there's a single right way to do it. But are we doing it and is it getting the results that we want? And I think we universally could say, no, we're not getting the results we want. So why do we keep pushing down this path that is not delivering what any of us consider to be acceptable results? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Got some big thinking questions for our producer. The author writes, why does Socrates refuse the opportunity to break out of prison on the eve of his execution? Is it true, as Jane Austen says, that happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance? What about James Baldwin's claim that the ostentatious parading of emotion at the suffering of others is actually a mark of cruelty? Students with different sorts of life experiences will respond differently to such questions, and by listening to one another, they may grow out of their naive supposition that there are uncontested answers. In short, a common curriculum helps them to feel that they belong to a community of inquiry despite powerful forces that may drive them apart. Now you're sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, Justin, I thought we just ended the last segment by talking about how common curriculum is what's ruined everything and made it mediocre. It's the way that we've gone about common curriculum, right? It's the way that we've decided to standardize that's the problem. It's not the notion that we should all be exposed to something. It's the notion that we all get exposed to it the same way, and that the purpose of getting exposed to it is to learn a black and white answer.
We're told this is what you have to learn as the correct answer.
Right.
And not that there's multiple.
There is a correct answer, and if you don't do it this way, then it is wrong. That is a entirely different type of core education than what we're talking about here. A common education, a common curricular education does not have to be a black and white education in terms of yes or no, fact or fiction, Yeah, it has to include some of that, absolutely it does. But the idea here is that colleges secretly already know this, and that's why so many assign a common reading, typically on an issue of current interest such as race relations or climate change, to incoming students over the summer before they arrive on campus, and then organize a few follow-up lectures and discussions. That's fine as far as it goes, but it doesn't go nearly far enough.
I'm going to pick up on that correct answer thing because unfortunately, I think that's where our society is in a lot of things. Okay. You tell me what I'm supposed to do and I'll do that, and it should fix things because that's easy. Don't make me think. Don't tell me that it's not black and white. Don't tell me there's a lot of gray in there. Unfortunately, in life, I believe there is a lot of gray. And it made me think of one of our favorite people that we have on the show, and that's Professor Timothy Beale and the whole process of religion. And he taught us how in the early days of the church, a lot of the Bible is not a book of answers. It's a book of questions. And that would freak a lot of Christians in the United States and around the world. It would freak them out. No, I read the Bible because it tells me exactly this is what I'm supposed to do. And according to the biblical authority, Timothy Beale, he says, no, the Bible was written as a book of questions so that people could get together and come up with what they think the right answer is. And he told us of pastors who do that. And I know a lot of you are probably, clicking off your phone or computer right now and you're saying, by God, that's blasphemy. The church is about giving me the answers and how I'm supposed to live. Is it? Or is that what we did? We made a commonality out of it so that people would flock to it so that they would feel comfortable because here's exactly what you're supposed to do. When the whole premise of the writings is the author raising questions as, well, what would the right thing be to do in this situation? And they're kind of asking us, the audience, to decide. That's the type of education that we're talking about. We can be exposed to the same type of literature or to the same questions, and we have multiple answers that all could be correct based on where we're coming from. And if you remember back to your junior American Lit class in high school, you have that person up there telling you, this is what Edgar Allan Poe meant when he wrote The Raven. And you're like, if you're like me in a questioning team, really? How do we know that's what? Is there anything out there? Because I raised my hand. Is there anything out there that said Edgar Allan Poe wrote down, said, this is what I meant? Well, no, this is what we just all know. Bullcrap. You don't know what Edgar Allan Poe meant. But that's what we're doing. We do it in our schools. To your point with this article, I think of Timothy Beale. We do it in our churches. People want black and white answers.
We're doing it in our politics.
Right.
Why are we surprised that we're divided?
But we do
that people
because
are arguing.
What are the two
when
bases?
You've only ever been told that there's one right answer.
But what are the two building blocks of our society? Schools and religion. So now we have it in politics, right? Or politics is the third building block. Yeah. And people want a black and white answer to questions that don't enhance themselves to black and white answers.
Right.
That's it's a great question.
Where the only good answers, right? The only way to move forward as a society is compromise. But we're not teaching that. We're not teaching understanding. We're not teaching empathy.
We're not teaching it anywhere.
And we're not teaching
it in the
compromise.
schools. We're not teaching it in the churches. We're not teaching it with our politicians.
No. And then we're surprised.
So why do we have this great divide?
Why are we so divided? Well, because everybody believes inside that they are right and that the other people are refusing to accept the facts. And nobody's interested in stepping into anybody else's shoes and saying, well, gee, I wonder why they're thinking what they're thinking. And so now the question is, where do we go from here?
How do we fix it? How do we make it better?
Well, there's some colleges that are trying or have been for 20 plus years.
But to your point, we're going to go broader than that and say this should be done back in the elementary level of education.
That's what I would say.
Because if you wait till college, because we know you're not a big proponent of college for college's sake.
Right.
So we don't want to make people have to go to college.
And what does that do to everybody that doesn't go? We keep telling everybody that college isn't for everybody, but if the only place you're going to get that learning is at college, then that's not fair.
So we have to bring this down.
Oh, I think so.
To the elementary, middle school, high school level. When I say elementary education, I don't mean grades K through 6. I
would contend that we completely have to rethink K through 12 in terms of the order in which things are taught and the priority that we give all the way up through higher education.
Because we believe on the show there are basic skills you need to know.
Yes.
You need to be able to know your math facts. You need to be able to know phonics to read. There are black and white things you need to know. You need those skills to then take on these questions. But you can incorporate some of the literature and the art while you're learning how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, while you're learning how to read using phonics and things like that. You can bring some of these questions in. And what do we know about little children? If you spent any time with little kids, if you ask them a question, what will they tell you? They will tell you exactly what they're thinking.
Yep.
You may not like the answer, but you will get an honest response.
Here's what I'm thinking.
By the time we get to, the age of accountability, 12, 14 years old, some people start to think, well, what is it they want to hear? What's the answer?
Well, and lying becomes more regular.
Right.
But before the age of 5.
But you ask little kids.
You're hard pressed to get.
Why did Socrates not try to escape? I don't know. I think it's because you're getting an honest, gut level reaction, which is what we should all do all the time if we weren't fearful of the repercussions that would occur.
We know that the single easiest time in your life to learn language is before the age of 5, which is part of why when we've seen, people who are unfortunately deprived of the ability to learn any language before the age of 5, it's so difficult after that. And some never can build the building blocks of language because it just has to do with that developmental phase being so critical to developing thought patterns and the way that we think and how that interacts with language, which is literally right. That is the fundamental basis of the rest of education. Because if you cannot read and write and communicate with other people, you can't learn things nearly as effectively, because that's how we teach and share and do things with other people. We're talking about we want to have these classes where we ask these questions and have these discussions. Well, if you can't freaking speak and you can't read, how are you supposed to ever do those things? We could have every student in the United States know at least 2 languages by the time they're 5 or 6 years old. Rudimentary
and
understanding.
What would happen to their empathy levels? Because you're studying other cultures and you realize you're not the only person on the planet and that other people do things the same as you, but they also do things differently than you. And that would then create a more empathetic individual, because you would realize there are all kinds of people that make up this planet we call Earth. And of course, there's all kinds of people that make up the population in your own country, the United States. But you don't get that because you sit in a homogeneous group, in most cases, of people who are pretty close to being the same way you are, because we do schools by neighborhoods. And so therefore, you're never exposed to anything any differently.
You're going to say, well, where are we going to get the time for all this instruction that you want to do for language, and more reading and more writing? How are we going to get, there's not enough time as it is. Well, here's what I'm going to ask our producer, and we're going to get his answer when we come back from break. He is currently in high school. Tell me something that you learned in science. Tell me something that you learned in science before 5th grade. Tell me something, any listener, tell me something that you learned in science class before 5th grade. Tell me. I want to know. What did you learn? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Science is critically important, right? I mean, we all know it. It's a huge, huge part of life. But what did you learn in science before 5th grade? Just out of curiosity. Can you tell me something, Levi? What did you learn in science before 5th grade?
Off the top of my head, I don't know if I can tell you anything.
Oh, you don't know anything that you learned in science before. What about history? Tell me something that you learned in history before 5th grade. Anything?
Mm-hmm.
Anything? Okay.
Mine's
Lance, you got anything? Do you remember anything you learned in science before 5th grade or in history before 5th grade?
Well, it was back before the sun came up, but it was a long time ago.
Back in Roman times.
But I remember Roy B. Jiv, The Colors of the Rainbow.
Uh-huh.
I think that was taught in elementary school. And I think every elementary student, only because I'm in education, I don't remember it, learns about the first Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Because it's a chance to do artwork, commingling of.
I remember keep, change, flip when dividing fractions.
That's math.
But that's math. I didn't ask about that. I asked about science and I asked about history.
So
my point here.
I know. So what's your point, Justin?
Yeah.
My point here is add up the instructional time that is given to science and history before 5th grade. Add that up, or through 5th grade. Add that up. And we're going to say, there's 3 people on this show, and not a one of us can tell you a thing that we remember being taught other than, save the colors of the rainbow, which, yes, you could contend is science. I don't know if any of us could have explained to you when we got taught that it's because light gets separated, into different wavelengths, that we understood that. Maybe we knew the colors. We didn't really know that we were learning any science. We learned science and it was like, wow, this is science. The only science that I remember from before 5th grade, the only science was in 2nd grade, dissecting an owl pellet. Now, what I was supposed to have learned from that, I don't know, but I remember because it was cool. We're picking apart this dropping of an owl that's been sterilized. So we are investing.
And you could have been learning a language, is your point.
You could have, right. I mean, with just that time, all of that instruction time, you not one extra language, you probably could have learned 2 or 3 extra languages if you wanted to, and not just learn how to speak them, but learn how to read and write in them. I don't know any other languages other than English, and that's one of the worst things about my education that I'm displeased about, and I'm well past the prime opportunity to learn additional languages, way past that opportunity. I was past it when I started trying to learn Spanish in high school. It's too late then to be it's not too late because you can still learn it, right? Adults can learn a second language. But the way we have to learn it, and there's lots of research and good study on this, the way that an adult or even a teenager has to learn a new language is completely different than the way somebody under the age of 10 is learning language, and especially under the age of 5. My point is, are science and history critically important? Absolutely. What good is it doing us to teach those things before 6th grade? What good is it doing? Is it doing some good? Sure, because kids are curious and they can learn and you can do discussion and they're having fun and that's all valuable. But they could have as much fun and they could be as curious and they could get more life skills that help them forever if we were spending more time on reading, writing, and math up until 5th grade. And that would also mean that if those fundamentals were better developed, then we don't have to spend as much time revisiting fundamentals and reteaching crap in middle school and high school in those subject areas, which then what does that allow more time for? To do these other things that you have to have the fundamentals to do. And maybe to be able to retain some things in social studies and in science that you might actually use because you can remember them rather than totally forget that you were taught them in the first place.
But why doesn't it happen? Because people don't like change. You said it right there. We can give you all the information. We can give you all the studies that show what would be a better way. And you can ask the question, why doesn't it happen? And you just answered your own question, Justin. And it's because people don't want change. They're leery of that change.
I'm not a professional educator, and you were for 35 years.
Oh,
what do you think about what I mean?
I was standing up saying amen and preach because I think I've rubbed off on you, or you've taken a look at some things, because that's exactly the way it should be. But you're fighting, this uphill battle because nobody wants anything any differently, because unfortunately too many people think, well, I was a success and I had school this way, so we should go back to doing schools the way we've always done it. Then how many people from the man's side, from the education side, are going to attack us and say, well, you can't do that for the masses. You can't accomplish that. It won't work. It's going to cost too much money. Why? Because they lose control. Because if we teach everybody the right answer and we teach everybody what the wrong answer is, then everybody will follow in lockstep, and we can continue to let the people in power have power, and the people who don't have power never have power. And that way the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor, and the middle class tries to struggle. And that's what we want, because if everybody's struggling, nobody's going to take my power away from me. How do you overcome that one? Because that, in a nutshell, is the problem. And as you pointed out, I was the educator. I was the salmon struggling, swimming upstream against the man my entire career. And I made inroads, but I didn't change anything. The system is still there. I changed the system within my classroom. I changed the system within my athletic field where I was coaching, but I didn't change enough of them, because now they're sending their children back to the same institution, and everything that I worked for is now gone in my local school.
I would imagine that many people listening to the show, probably everybody listening to the show, has some strong opinions one way or the other about our founding fathers, right? Great people, terrible people, whatever. I would think the thing that we can all agree on is that in order to get done what they got done, two things were necessary: some serious creative thinking and some serious compromise, because you would not have united 13 colonies.
John Adams and Thomas Jefferson didn't agree on anything, but they worked for the liberty and freedom and the creation of the United States.
They agreed on that, and what did those two men in particular, if we're talking about those two, what did they share in common about how they became who they were? Well, they were both very well educated. And what was their education like? What do you know, Levi, I guess quickly, what do you know about how Thomas Jefferson or John Adams were educated? Do you know anything?
No,
do you think
absolutely nothing.
Do you think that it looked somewhat like how you're educated? Like, did they go to, a preschool and then 1st through 12th grade and then go to college? Is that what they probably did?
I'm assuming they probably had to figure out most of their knowledge.
Yeah, John Adams was in college right before he turned 14 years old.
Was there any reading back then?
Mm-hmm.
Books?
Almost the only education that John Adams had up until he went to college was reading. Read, and math. And that was about it. Read, write, math. Read, journal, and math. And read in multiple languages. He was reading 3 different languages by that point, because one of the reasons that we did that wasn't because they were great, people of like, oh yeah, you got to know other languages. It was, you have to know this other language because this book is only written in this language. And so they read and learned in multiple languages. And then basically the skill set, which John Adams became a teacher and a lawyer, him learning to do those things all of the skills, right, the rote memorization stuff that had to be learned, all of that was educated from basically 13 and 14 on. None of it before that, other than the basic fundamentals of how to learn and how to read and how to write. That was basically all he was getting. And language, which was inadvertent, but it was there. And that's very similar to what Thomas Jefferson had, because those classes of people that wanted to be educated, that was pretty much the standard process. They had to read, and they had books. And so you were going to read, you were going to write, and you were going to make sure that you know math. The fundamentals of math. I mean, they didn't know calculus, But then if you went to college, right, at 14, and you were going to go into a field that you needed math, you were now ready to learn calculus because you really understood, right? Or you were ready to do algebra 2 because you understood all of the fundamentals of how math worked, and you'd been practicing it for 14 years. We did it before because Lance asked, well, people are scared because it's changed and it's different than what we did before. The whole reason I brought up the Founding Fathers is because if we think that what they did is pretty miraculous, regardless of whether or not we think they're good people, right? Forget that. Do we think what they did is remarkable? Do you think that we have a group of 20 to 30 leaders today that could do the same? If the answer is not a resounding yes, that tells you everything that you need to know about what we're doing wrong.
I went into Algebra 1 and 2 completely ignorant of the fundamental basics of algebra.
And that is not unusual. That is not unusual. We're wasting, 40% of instructional hours across K through 12 education because we're either reteaching something that you were already supposed to know, or we're teaching you crap that you can't remember because we're teaching it at the wrong time. I mean, 40%. Add up how much money that is. That's a lot of money to be thrown away. Everybody throw more money at education. You don't have to. No, there's a ton of money there that's being misused. That's frustrating teachers, frustrating parents, and not serving children well.
I would just wrap it up by saying they were taught first to think. Then they were created with problems to solve. Yeah. So if you create that human brain, how to think, then problem solving follows. But if all you do is teach right answers and wrong answers, all you know to do is what you've learned because you've never learned to think. That's how I would sum it up. And now you usually ask me why we do this, right? Or do you want to comment on my thinking?
We could go on forever.
Okay.
I just want to start our own school.
But that's how I would wrap it up, is that...
Give me 10 kids and let's see where they're at in...
The founding, I think we would be much further ahead than the average education in the United States and around the world. Well, the thing is, folks, here's the thing. Not everybody educates the way we do. There are many countries in the world who do exactly what Justin and I have talked about today. Okay. And then
what we're doing is an experiment.
They send their children to the United States to go to college because they do a lot of what I just said that Justin went on his soapbox to explain about our founding fathers. And that is they learned how to think first, and then they were presented with problems. And other nations do that. It's not difficult.
At 8 years old, John Quincy Adams, our 6th president, was reading Horace in Latin and writing about it.
And Latin's not even taught anymore. It's known as the dead language.
At 8 years old, reading a philosopher that most people today, I would contend in the United States, could not read an English translation of at a proficient level. An 8-year-old was reading that and writing reports about it. And you say, well, that's just because he was a freak. That wasn't unusual for people who had children